In 1973, UK has become member of European Community and subject to its additional law. Since then, UK has both benefited and took great loss as a result. Recently, Britain's Prime Minister has promised a referendum on whether the UK should stay in the EU or leave. EU membership has found heated debate in the UK for 4 decades. Now, with the anti-EU party, UKIP making headwaves, David Cameron has promised straight in or out vote. This is what we had to say.
Today, public disillusionment with the EU is at an all-time high. And there are several reasons for this. People feel that the EU is heading in a direction that they never signed up to. They resent the interference in our national life by what they see as unnecessary rules and regulation. They wonder what the point of it all is.
But before we can look at the future, let's look at the past. The EU is a unique economic and political partnership between 27 European countries that together cover much of a continent. It was created in 1957 by signing the Treaty of Rome after the Second World War in order to foster economic cooperation and to lift barriers to trade freely between European countries. As of 1950, the European coal and steel community began to unite European countries economically and politically in order to secure lasting peace. As of today, the EU motto is United in Diversity, which signifies how the Europeans have come together in the form of EU to work for peace and prosperity. In 1958, European Economic Community was formed, which later was renamed as the European Union in 1993. Thanks to the abolition of border controls between EU countries, people, goods and services are able to move freely. As the EU continues to grow, it remains focused on making its governing institution more transparent and democratic. Greater powers are being given to the directly elected European Parliament, while national parliaments are being given a greater role, working alongside the European institutions. In turn, European citizens have an ever-increasing number of channels for taking part in the political process. However, before we can go any further into the argument, we need to understand the EU law and how they are implemented within the UK and consequently how they have impacted the economy and the general public.
EU's main goal is to ensure integration of member states' economic and political systems and the establishment of a single market based on the free movement of goods, people and services. In order to do this, member states give up part of their sovereignty under the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, which gives power to the EU institutions to adopt laws. The main forms of EU laws are based on the treaties, regulations and directives that take precedence over national law and are binding on national authorities. The EU also issues indirect and non-binding instruments such as recommendations and opinions. The first EU law is the treaties, which is also known as the primary legislation in the superior law that becomes applicable to all member states automatically without the member state having to do anything under Section 2 of the European Community Act 1972. They are the highest form of EU law and set out a range of aims as well as rights and obligations. The main treaties are Treaty of Rome, 1957, that founded the EU. Treaty of Maastricht, 1992, that set out the social chapter and the single market. Treaty of Amsterdam, 1997, that reformed the EU. Treaty of Nice, 2000, expansion to 25, then 27 states. Treaty of Lisbon, 2007 to make the EU more democratic. These treaties have both horizontal and vertical direct effect. The second form of EU laws is the regulations, which are the most direct form of EU law. Soon as they are passed, they become legally binding throughout every member state. Third form of EU law is the directives that derives from supplementary law. Unlike the others, they are not directly applicable, meaning the member state has to pass some legislation to incorporate them into law.
Trying to integrate the member states, both economically and politically, it must prove to be rather difficult to implement such law within the member states. UK has a very old legal system, what is quite different to any other member states within the EU.
EU legislation is directly applicable and automatically incorporated into the UK law as soon as it is passed without the need for any further actions. However, directives that are not specified as regulations gives member states the freedom to implement in ways that they deem to the best fit. The EU law making generally begins with the European Commission making a proposal which must be debated by the European Council, grouping of the EU government and the EU Parliament before adopting it. Under Section 3 of the European Communities Act 1972, and every other member states are required to take note of the provision of the EC Treaty and also the decisions of the European Court. The Commission of the EC is responsible for ensuring the EU law is correctly applied. Member states are responsible to ensure that the national legislation is consistent with EU law. In the UK, the Department Policy officials assess the impact of the proposal on the UK and consider whether it's actually the best way to achieve the Commission's original objectives. Whitehall Department work closely with UK Rep via the Cabinet Office and coordinate EU law issues for the government.
Thank you very much, Chris, for that information regarding the various forms of the EU law and how they are implemented within the UK. One thing I will add to this in that UK is involved from the first stage of EU law making process, which makes it easier for them to implement when it's come down to domestic level.
The doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty states that Act of Parliament constitute the highest form of law. Parliament is free to legislate in any manner that it wishes, and its legislation cannot be called into question by the courts. However, after joining the European Union in 1972, the UK Parliament is limited to their sovereignty rights to the EU Parliament. Under the Treaty of Functioning of the European Union, all member states agrees to give up part of their sovereignty in order to fulfill the objectives of the European Union. UK must take provision of the European Community Treaty and the decisions of the European Court into account according to Section 3 of the European Community Act 1972. Regardless of all the fuss that has been made, there can be little doubt that the EC law is supreme and that the sovereignty of the UK Parliament is thereby reduced. There are other ways that EU law affected the UK. For instance, the primary law that is contained in the treaty articles have horizontal effect in that rights are created in individuals against individuals and organizations in private sectors of industry. Further to this, UK is also affected as the result of the monetary union of the single currency, the euro. This has a particular effect on the business law, which in effect brought about problems regarding to terms in contract, that they might be frustrated by impossibility of performance and so may be discharged.
We've been debating over the last few decades whether the EU was a good or bad decision for the general public of the United Kingdom. Until now, we have no clear conclusion of the advantages and or disadvantages the EU law has brought to our nation. However, we can start by analysing the obvious direct effect of the EU on the British nation. As the UK is a member of the EU, there are no quotas or tariffs for companies exporting goods and services within the EU. As a result of this, the UK have exported over £159 billion worth of goods and £75 billion worth of services to the EU, which is a staggering 53% of the total that has been exported out of the UK. European officials did say that European legislation is meant to make it easier for UK businesses to trade across the EU's 27 states without any barriers. This provided income stream of 45% for the UK economy from the EU. That's a 6% increase since joining the EU in 1972. Not to forget that as UK citizens, we also have the freedom to travel and work anywhere within the 27 member states without any restrictions. Common commercial policy rules relating to this area are put in place to protect the EU businesses using things like tariffs, subsidies and quotas on imports from outside the Eurozone. EU competition law. Companies have the opportunity to do business across the EU. The law is designed to stop bigger firms from abusing their power by setting up cartels and monopolies. The internal market of the single market means the UK citizens are free to move, live, study and trade anywhere within the EU. No border control across most of the EU means UK citizens and other EU citizens can travel without any custom limits. However, there's always a different side to the coin. That's just to say, what are the known factors that cause the UK disadvantages by joining the EU? Well, for instance, the £44 billion deficit on trade in goods within the EU, which is 44% of the total UK deficit compared to the £159 billion export to the EU. In recent years, the EU market has become less important to the UK economy, not to mention the massive £6.6 billion contribution made to the EU by Britain, which is the second largest contribution after Germany. Last but not least, what about the other 500,000 EU citizens who came to the UK in the last 6 years? Many debated that this has reduced or even threatened our job market, particularly for the young Britons.
After analyzing the pros and cons of EU membership, it looks better for the UK to withdraw from the European Union. The cost of annual membership, which is well over 140 billion, does not add up with the benefit. The EU is said to be a drain on the British economy. Huge amount of money given to the EU is allocated on wasteful spending such as the Commonwealth agriculture policy, which the UK does not benefit from in the slightest. Membership of single market is said to be vital to British trade. Facts, however, suggest otherwise. UK export 60% out of EU and only 40% to the EU. Export to out of EU has also grown 37% faster. Argument of single market making it easy for import, export therefore does not add up. The EU is run by unelected, unaccountable allies with vast power. They bring legislation that has not been voted by UK national parliament, yet are greater than our own law. This is not democratic and the power should be handed back to Westminster. Being part of the EU threatens national identity and the UK economy too. Britain don't need to rely on its European neighbours in order to succeed. UK has also been affected by the global recession. However, it is not fair to use our taxpayers' money to bail out our European governments. If UK withdraw from EU and become self-sufficient and start trade routes with our countries, we could be better off. Using taxpayers' money to pay for Europeans rather than British nations is depriving British people of work and advantages.